Today we're going to talk about viruses and cells. So we're going to talk about two types of cells, prokaryotic cells and eukaryotic cells, and then viruses. So we'll start with prokaryotic cells. Prokaryotic cells are bacteria, and they look kind of like this. This is a general bacteria cell. These are very simple cells. As you can see, there's not a lot of stuff inside of them. Okay, these were the first organisms to evolve, and they do not have a nucleus. So I think no, so no nucleus and no organelles. And when I say no organelles, I mean no membrane-bound organelles, like the mitochondria and the chloroplast and the nucleus. They are a living cell, and since they don't have a nucleus, their DNA is just found floating in the cytoplasm. And that's just kind of the jelly-like stuff that fills the cell and kind of helps hold everything in place. They can be beneficial. So you have bacteria in your intestines that help you digest your food. They also help cycle things through ecosystems. They also can be pathogenic. So there are some that can make you sick as well. They reproduce by a process called binary fission, which is an asexual process, meaning they're going to make identical cells. They can, however, reproduce very quickly. Now, the structures are pretty simple. There's not a whole lot of things, and some of them have more than others, but just kind of general structure. So in the middle here, we have our genetic info, which is the DNA. It has these little dots, which are the ribosomes, so they can build proteins. They have this little tail-like structure called a flagella, and this basically whips around and helps them move through environments. They have these little hair-like projections called pili. These help them attach to surfaces, and then it also lets them exchange things between different bacteria. And then surrounding them, they have a cell wall and a cell membrane. And then some of them have these little extra pieces of genetic information called plasmids, which they can share with each other. This allows them to share different traits with each other, like maybe antibiotic resistance. Eukaryotic cells are a lot more complex than prokaryotic cells, and you can see down here that they have a lot more stuff inside of them. So I like to think you do, because you do have a nucleus. So these do have a nucleus and organelles. Again, membrane-bound organelles, like the mitochondria and the nucleus and the chloroplast. These are also living cells. Since they have a nucleus, their DNA is found in the nucleus. Some examples of these would be protists, fungi, animals, and plants. Some of these can be pathogenic, which again makes you sick. And they can either reproduce by mitosis, which is asexual, or, in some of them, meiosis, which is sexual, which just means that they're going to have a different combination of genes, which allows for greater genetic diversity. So we'll list some of the structures here. So over here, I just have an animal cell, generalized animal cell, and over here I have a generalized plant cell, so you can kind of see the difference between some of them. So the big circle right in the middle of both of them is going to be the nucleus, and that squiggly stuff inside is their genetic info. They both are going to have a cell membrane around them. However, the plant cells also have a cell wall, which is the outer barrier here. They both have a mitochondria, which makes energy. That's the one with the little squigglies inside of it. And then the plant cell also has that chloroplast, which makes food for it. That's the one with the little stacks inside of it here. They also both have ribosomes, which again are little dots here. Those are what makes proteins for them. And then they have other organelles like the rough and smooth ER and the Golgi apparatus and Vacuoles, plants have a very large vacuole, which stores water to help give them their shape. And then we have our viruses on the back. So viruses are considered non-living because they don't have all of the characteristics that all other living things do. They have some of them, just not all of them. So they're usually considered non-living. They are not a cell, and their genetic info is found inside of the capsid, which can also be called a protein coat. These can be pathogenic, again, can make you sick. Not all of them can make you sick, but they all infect cells. And they do need a host cell to reproduce, so they can't reproduce on their own. So if we look at the structure of these two viruses here, the first one over here on the left is a bacteriophage. This one affects bacteria cells. This is just kind of a classic HIV virus that would infect humans. So the top part on here is the capsid, or the protein coat. And then the squiggly stuff inside is their genetic info, which could be DNA or RNA. And then on this one over here, the capsid is that little diamond-looking structure on the inside. And their genetic info, again, is inside of that, so the little squiggly inside. And they also have this important thing that sticks off of them called glycoproteins. And this is what allows them to attach to a host cell. So if the shape of this glycoprotein fits the shape of the cell that they're going to infect, then the cell will use this and just kind of let them right in. There are two viral reproduction cycles, the lytic cycle and the lysogenic cycle. We'll start with the lytic cycle. So I like to think this is a shorter word, so it's a shorter cycle. And with this one, you're going to have immediate symptoms. And when we say immediate, it could be days to maybe a few weeks, like 1 or 2 weeks. With this one, we're going to make new viruses right away. So some examples, we could think flu or COVID. We're going to get sick right away. You're going to make new viruses right away. So what happens is the virus attaches to the host cell. It's going to inject its DNA or RNA. So I'm going to put inject genetic info. The host cell will actually build the viral parts using the code from their genetic info. The viruses get assembled, and then they actually burst out, lysing the cell, and then they can go infect other cells, and this will usually kill the host cell. Okay, so they lyse the cell, which again just means they burst out to go infect other cells. The lysogenic cycle is a little bit longer. With this one, this is our longer word, so I think longer cycle. With this one, we typically have delayed symptoms. So sometimes with these, you won't have symptoms for months to years later. And with this one, the DNA actually becomes part of the host cell DNA, or the genetic info becomes part of the host cell DNA. So a good example of this one would be HIV or herpes. So here's what it looks like down here. So it starts off pretty much the same. So it's going to attach and inject the DNA or RNA. So it's going to attach and inject the genetic info. The DNA becomes part of the host cell DNA. So it's causing a mutation in the host DNA because it's changing the host DNA. Now, when the cell is going through regular mitosis or binary fission, it's dividing, that DNA gets replicated right on with the host cell DNA. So their DNA is replicated or copied. So every time that the cells divide, now the new cells have a copy of that DNA. So the cells are going to divide with the viral DNA as part of their DNA now. Then something will trigger it. A lot of times it's an environmental trigger, like extreme stress on the organism. Sometimes certain foods can trigger it. Other illnesses can trigger it, but it will enter the lytic cycle and do what we just did up there. So the viral parts will be built. Then they will get assembled. And then they will burst out to infect other cells. And this is when the person would have the active symptoms. So this one a person usually has for their lifetime.